It was raining the night I returned to my father's house. The same night I learned that everything I believed about him was a lie. The gravel crackled beneath my shoes as I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like wet earth and rust. I hadn't been here since the funeral. A small, quiet service with barely 10 people, all avoiding each other's eyes. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. Dust had settled on the furniture like an old memory refusing to be wiped away. Every step stirred ghosts, faint echoes of laughter, the sound of my father's boots against the wooden floor, and the silence that followed the day he disappeared. For years, everyone told me the same story. My father had run away. They said he couldn't handle failure after the business collapsed, that he left when the debts became too heavy, when the marriage fell apart. Some men just can't handle failure, they said, and I believed them, until that night. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, the place my mother always told me never to go. The old ladder creaked as I pushed open the hatch. A wave of stale air brushed my face. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dust and cobwebs, revealing stacks of boxes, suitcases, and a covered trunk in the far corner. The trunk looked different, newer, heavier, with brass edges that still gleamed faintly. I wiped the surface and saw something carved into the lid. For M, my mother's initial. But there was no lock, just a small circular slot. A keyhole. And then I saw it. Taped beneath one of the attic beams, wrapped in brittle yellow tape, a small iron key. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. The metal was cold, almost clean, as if someone had touched it recently. Fit perfectly. When I turned the key, there was a soft click, and a hollow sigh, like wood exhaling after years of silence. Inside the trunk lay 3 things: a leather-bound notebook, a sealed envelope addressed to Thomas, a photograph, my father standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Both were smiling, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. There was tension there, something unspoken. I opened the notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but halfway through, I found handwriting, my father's. The ink had faded, the lines shaky. If you're reading this, it means she finally told you nothing. She'll say I ran away. She'll say I was weak. Don't believe her. The truth is in the ledger, the one she hid. The words froze me. What ledger? The next page was empty except for a smeared fingerprint and a faint drop of ink. I sat there in the dark attic, listening to the rain. The envelope with my name on it felt heavy in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. For the first time since I was a child, I felt real fear. Not of what was outside the house, but of what the walls already knew. The next morning, I drove to see my mother. She was in her garden, trimming roses like nothing had ever changed. Her gloves were clean, her face calm, a mask she'd worn my entire life. I showed her the photograph. "Who's this man with Dad?" I asked. She looked at it for less than a second. "That was his business partner, Vernon Hale. Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" "Because he ruined us." Her voice cracked slightly, but her tone felt rehearsed. I pulled out the notebook next. Her expression hardened. "What ledger was he talking about?" I asked. "You shouldn't read his lies," she said sharply. "Lies? He wrote this by hand. He was trying to tell me something." She straightened up, her jaw tight. "He wrote a lot of things, Thomas. Most of them when he was drinking." Then she looked at me, that same warning look she used when I was a boy and asked questions she didn't want to answer. "There's more, isn't there?" I said quietly. "About why he really left." She turned away. "Go home, Thomas. Let the dead stay buried." That night, her words wouldn't leave my head. Let the dead stay buried. I went back to the trunk, flipping through the notebook again. Every page was blank, except for something I hadn't noticed before. Inside the back cover was a small slit, almost invisible. I tore it open and found a folded scrap of paper, written in the same shaky handwriting. "Ask Vernon about the mill. If he lies, you'll know why." The mill. That name pulled at something buried deep in memory. An old property my father once owned before the collapse. He called it his retreat, though no one ever went there but him. I hadn't thought about it in years. The next day I drove out to the mill. The road was overgrown, the path half swallowed by weeds and fog. The building itself was a skeleton of brick and timber, standing alone beside the river. Inside, the air was damp and sour. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. But when I moved deeper into the back room, I saw something that made my pulse quicken. A filing cabinet against the wall, its drawer half open. Inside were stacks of papers, ledgers, and receipts, all water-stained but still legible. I pulled one out and froze when I saw the name on the first page. Vernon Hale. Dozens of transactions. Dates matching the years before my father's disappearance. Each one signed in two places, my father's name and Vernon's. But besides several entries in red ink were words scrawled by hand. She knows. Too late. Get out. I didn't understand what it meant until I heard the sound behind me. Car door shutting. Someone had followed me. Through the cracked window, I saw a black sedan parked by the gate. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a dark coat. Even from a distance, I recognized the face. Older now, heavier, but unmistakable. Vernon Hale. He looked straight toward the building, his eyes narrowing as if he already knew who was inside. I slipped the ledger into my bag and backed away. The floor creaked under my foot, and for a second, our eyes met through the glass. He started walking toward the door. That was when I ran. By the time I reached the car, rain had started again. Heavy, blinding. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition. As I drove away, the image of his face burned in my mind. Why had he come here? How did he know I would be there that day? When I got back home, I locked the door and took out the envelope with my name on it, the one from the trunk. I tore it open at last. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you find this, it means she chose silence. Vernon was never my friend. He wanted everything, and she helped him. I read the words over and over, my heart pounding. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. For years I had thought my father had run away. Now, for the first time, I realized maybe he never left at all. Sleep didn't come that night. Every sound in the house felt louder, closer. I sat in the kitchen with the letter spread across the table, reading it again and again, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood. But there was no mistaking the words. Vernon was never my friend. He wanted everything, and she helped him. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside was silent, gray, and too calm, like it was holding its breath. I drove to my mother's house again. She was standing by the window when I arrived, as if she had been waiting. "I found the letter," I said quietly. "From him." Her expression didn't change. "Then you already know what you're not supposed to. Did you help Vernon?" She turned away, busying herself with a teacup that didn't need cleaning. "You wouldn't understand what it was like back then. Your father trusted the wrong people. He left me with nothing but shame and debt." "That's not what his letter says." Her hand trembled just slightly. "Your father wrote a lot of things. You think a man who destroys his family gets to write the truth afterward." Her calmness was cracking. I could see it in her eyes, the same way cracks spread through glass before it breaks. "I found the ledgers," I said. Her head snapped up. "What did you just say?" "At the mill. He was keeping records, wasn't he? Of every transaction. Every lie." She took a step toward me, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You shouldn't have gone there." "Why not?" "Because it's not safe." Something in her tone changed. Not anger, not guilt, but fear. Genuine, trembling fear. "What did Vernon do?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "He came back." I felt the air leave my chest. "What do you mean, came back?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "Last night, he was here. He said you were asking questions. He wanted to know if you'd found anything." I stared at her. "And what did you tell him?" "That I hadn't." Her hands were shaking now. "Thomas, please listen to me. Whatever your father wrote, you need to forget it. Burn the letter. Destroy the notebook. Don't talk to anyone else about it." "Why? What's he going to do?" She looked away, her voice barely audible. "He doesn't forgive. And he doesn't forget." I left the house shaken. The sky was dark again, heavy with clouds. The streets seemed emptier than usual, the air colder. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A car behind me, headlights staying just a little too close for too long. When I finally turned into my driveway, the street behind me went dark. I waited by the window for 10 minutes, but no one followed. Still, I locked every door, every window. Then I sat on the floor of my father's study and opened the ledger again. The entries were clearer now under proper light. The numbers, the signatures, the scribbles in red ink. It was like reading the last thoughts of a man who knew he was in danger. On the final page, near the bottom, was something I hadn't noticed before. A date, 2 weeks before he disappeared, and beside it, a note. Transfer signed. M agreed. V demands silence. M. My mother. I leaned back, feeling the world tilt. The room seemed to grow smaller, darker, heavier with every breath. Was she protecting Vernon all this time, or had she been forced? The next day, I called the number listed under Vernon's old company name, the one on the ledger. To my surprise, it still worked. A woman answered. Hale Industries. Is Mr. Hale available? I asked. There was a pause. Who's calling? Thomas Marin. It's about my father. Another pause. Then the line clicked, and a familiar voice came on. Calm, smooth, too controlled. Thomas, I was wondering when you'd reach out. I froze. You knew I'd call? I always knew you'd find the truth. Or at least what your father wanted you to find. What does that mean? You've been busy. The attic, the mill. You really shouldn't wander into places that don't belong to you. My throat tightened. You were there. I was making sure nothing dangerous was left behind. Your father was a complicated man, Thomas. He made mistakes, big ones, but I respected him. Respected him? I said bitterly. You stole everything he had. A quiet chuckle. Is that what your mother told you? She told me enough. I doubt that. She's never been good at telling the truth. Not even to herself. My hand clenched around the phone. What do you want? Nothing, really. Just a word of advice. His tone grew darker. Let the past go. It's already buried. You start digging, and you might find yourself buried with it. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the silent phone. Then I called my mother again, but she didn't answer. I drove to her house. The front door was open. Inside, the lights were off. The smell of rain and earth filled the hall. Mom! I called out. No answer. I stepped into the living room and froze. Her teacup was on the table, still warm. Her garden gloves were on the floor. And on the wall, in the corner, a picture frame was lying face down. I turned it over. It was a photo of her and my father, taken years ago. The glass was cracked through his face. Then I noticed something else. A set of muddy footprints leading toward the back door. I ran outside, calling her name. The yard was empty. The gate was wide open. Beyond it, tire tracks led toward the main road. I didn't know whether to call the police, Vernon, or no one at all. All I knew was that she was gone. That night, I searched through her house, desperate for any clue. Drawers, closets, shelves, every inch. Then, behind the bookshelf in her study, I found a small wooden box with a lock. I used my father's attic key. Fit perfectly. Inside was another letter, written in my mother's handwriting this time. Thomas, if you found this, I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago. Your father didn't run away. He tried to protect us. Vernon threatened him, said he would ruin us both. The night your father disappeared, he came here to confront him. I was there. I saw what happened. He didn't survive. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I turned the page. There was more. We buried him at the mill. No one would have believed me. Vernon said if I spoke, you'd be next. I stayed silent because silence was the only way to keep you safe. Couldn't breathe. The paper shook in my hands. My father hadn't run away. My mother hadn't lied for greed or hate. She'd lied out of fear. And Vernon had buried the truth. Literally. I left the house before dawn. The sky was turning pale gray, the kind of color that makes the world look washed out and hollow. There was only one place left to go, the mill. I parked the car by the river. The water was still, the fog hanging low. I took a flashlight and walked behind the main building, where the land dipped toward the trees. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. A patch of ground where the soil looked different, darker, newer. I dropped to my knees and began to dig. Minutes passed. The sound of the shovel scraping against rock echoed through the cold air. Then something solid. Piece of wood. I brushed away the dirt until I saw the outline of what was once a box. Old, rotted, but still intact. Inside was a metal nameplate, almost eaten by rust. But the letters were still visible. TM. My father's initials. My hands went cold. The truth was no longer a mystery. It was right in front of me, buried under years of silence and fear. I stood there trembling, staring down at the grave, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning air was heavy with fog, wrapping the old mill in silence. I stood over the place where my father's initials were carved into rusted metal. The ground beneath my feet held decades of lies, and the man I had spent half my life hating. The first light of dawn crept through the mist, painting everything gray and hollow. I felt numb. Not angry, not afraid, just hollow. I called the police. I told them what I found, that there might be human remains buried behind the mill. But by the time they arrived, the place looked different. The soil had been disturbed again. The wooden box was gone. The officer looked at me with tired eyes. You sure this isn't just old debris, son? This place has been abandoned for years. I saw his initials, I said. I saw the box. He sighed. We'll file a report. But without evidence, there's not much we can do. They left within the hour, leaving me standing in the fog with nothing but the emptiness of a truth that no one would believe. That night, I went through everything again. The letter from my father, the ledger, my mother's confession. Every line, every detail pointed to one name, Vernon Hale. He had taken everything. My father's company, his reputation, and his life. And now he had taken the last trace of his body too. I knew what I had to do. I went to his estate. His house stood at the edge of town, large and sterile, with lights glowing through the tall windows. When I rang the bell, the man who opened the door looked nothing like the smiling partner from that old photograph. Time had turned him cold, his face lined with arrogance and wealth. He didn't look surprised to see me. Thomas, he said, his voice calm and deep. I was wondering when you'd stop pretending to be a detective. You moved the box, I said quietly. Didn't you? He smiled faintly. I don't know what you think you found, but grave robbing is a serious crime. Don't play games. My father didn't run away. You killed him. He stepped closer, his tone sharp. Be careful with your words. You used my mother, I said, my voice shaking. You made her believe she had no choice. You destroyed everything we had. His eyes narrowed. Your father was a coward. He couldn't face what he did. He signed everything over to me willingly. He begged me to make it disappear. You're lying. He smiled again, the same empty smile from that photograph. You'll never prove anything. Not without your mother. And by now, she's too scared to stand with you. Something inside me snapped. Where is she? He didn't answer, just turned, poured himself a drink, and said over his shoulder, Some truths aren't meant to be dug up, Thomas. They rot everything they touch. I left before I did something I'd regret. My hands were shaking the whole drive home. When I got there, the house was dark. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Said only 3 words. It's over now. There was an address attached, the old Riverside warehouse near the docks. My heart dropped. I called the police, but the line kept cutting. I drove there myself, headlights cutting through the fog. The warehouse doors were open. Inside, the air smelled of oil and rain. I shouted her name, and then I heard it. A voice weak but familiar. Thomas. My mother was lying on the floor, her wrist bruised, her hair soaked with rain. I ran to her. Mom, what happened? She gripped my arm, her voice trembling. He wanted the letters. I told him I burned them. Where is he? She shook her head. Gone. He said if you keep digging, he'll make you disappear too. I looked around. The place was empty. Vernon had vanished. But something caught my eye, a briefcase half hidden beneath a tarp. Inside were documents, property records, and one final ledger, newer, cleaner, signed by him. And at the back, a folder labeled Marin Estate. Inside was the truth. Proof of every transfer, every forgery, every falsified signature. My father hadn't sold his company. It had been stolen, his name erased, his debts created on paper by the man who called himself a friend. And at the very bottom of the folder, one more thing. A confession letter and signed, but written in Vernon's handwriting. He wouldn't agree to disappear quietly. I didn't mean for it to happen the way it did. She saw. I told her to stay silent or she'd lose her son too. My breath caught. This was it, the proof my father had died for, the truth my mother had carried like a weight for decades. By morning, the police had everything. They took the documents, the ledger, the letter. They questioned my mother and put out a warrant for Vernon Hale's arrest. But he never showed up. He was gone before sunrise. House empty, bank accounts cleared, car abandoned by the border. For months, the investigation dragged on. His name made headlines for a while, then faded. Just another scandal, another story people forget once something new comes along. But for me, forgetting wasn't an option. I sold the old house, the one that held too many ghosts. My mother moved into a care home by the coast. She rarely spoke about the past, but sometimes, in the quiet moments, she'd say, "He loved you, you know. He always did." And I would nod, even though the words still broke something inside me. A year later, I stood again by the river where the mill once stood. The building had been torn down, replaced by new apartments. The ground where my father's name had been buried was now smooth concrete. I placed a single key on the ground, the same iron key I'd found in the attic, and whispered, "I found the truth, Dad, and I'm sorry it took me so long." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice, calm, steady, proud, and I realized something. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just changes the shape of the cage you live in. But it's still worth finding. Because lies, no matter how long they're buried, always find a way to breathe again. I turned to leave, the morning light breaking through the clouds. Behind me, the river whispered softly, like it was finally letting go. And for the first time in my life, so was I.